Over 70% of viewers are unsubscribed. Be sure to hit that button if you haven't already. When Airbus introduced the A380 to the world, you almost knew it was going to capture the attention of many. While this may not have carried over to the purchase for the widebody, it surely has left a lasting impact on the aviation community, and also general travellers, who go on to rant and rave about the flying experience on board the type. The multi-billion-dollar question lying on many airlines' shoulders is in relation to its resurgence and whether or not the comeback will truly last for the long term. During the latter stages of the 2010s, airlines were already beginning to unveil plans to retire their A380 jets, and this had been primarily spurred on by the realization that the Airbus A380 was no longer an efficient option for long-haul travel, and as other twin-engined aircraft types cemented themselves as leaders within the industry, there was no need for some airlines to keep relying on this kind of aircraft for their day-to-day flying. While for some airlines, the retirements was scheduled, say, towards the early stages of the 2020s, for others it was towards the more mid to late 2020s. Undoubtedly, though, it was abnormal to see aircraft already looking to be shipped off for really such a newly delivered type. Some airlines were looking at scrapping the aircraft on the 10th anniversary of them taking delivery of it. When you consider some aircraft can last 20 to 30 years, it's quite staggering. But when the global pandemic hit, what it did do was offer airlines a means to really review their fleet for sometimes the first time in decades. It also gave them the chance to remove more inefficient aircraft. This especially leaned on your wide bodies. For as demand had plummeted to zero, these airlines needed to find ways to streamline and cut their costs down dramatically to ensure that they'd be able to weather the storm that the pandemic brought with it. There were ultimately several airlines, from Air France to Etihad Airways, Qatar, and Lufthansa, just naming a few, that had axed their A380 and basically rid themselves of any plans to bring it back, deciding to, in some cases, sell the fleet or just permanently ground it, awaiting the next steps for removal. While unfortunate at the time, it didn't necessarily come as a shock for these airlines, especially, say, for Qatar Airways, who were never all that fond of the Airbus A380 and made that quite clear on several occasions in very vocal interviews. However, when demand returned, something staggering happened for the A380. A once considered down-and-out aircraft type now had a new lease on life. Supply chain issues meant that upcoming next-generation widebodies could not be delivered on time. What this meant for many airlines is their perfectly planned-out future couldn't occur as they had imagined. Remember, that plan involved many airlines ridding themselves of the A380, which was considered a burden, and moving towards new twin-engine jets to cover. But when demand returned, they found themselves in a bit of a predicament. They didn't have the available new-gen aircraft to cover for the grounded super jumbo capacity, but these planes were still, in most cases, sitting there. Therefore, the A380 experienced quite the resurgence, with even companies that, yes, hated the aircraft, bringing it back to cover, much to customers' delight. But how long is the Airbus A380 comeback slated to be around for? Is it for the long term, or is it a mere short-term solution to an ongoing problem? For most airlines, the latter would definitely apply to their forecasting. The A380 still remains an excellent aircraft that it can fly between major hubs where, say, not only slots can be tight, but demand is high. However, airlines would, in almost all cases, much rather do this with more efficient aircraft, with obviously as well half as many engines. Ultimately, this has meant that many airlines that reintroduced the plane did so with very tempered expectations. Additionally, it can't help but feel from an outside perspective looking in that it is a waiting game for these jets to be phased out once more. Etihad Airways, however, has been a fantastic example of an airline that went from basically ruling out the aircraft for a return to then actually reintroducing it. The carrier said that they would reintroduce the plane on service to London Heathrow, strictly focusing on just one city. But see, they've seen the success with the A380 through to Heathrow and also adjusting levels of demand, and are now deploying it on several routes right around the world, really based on those results it saw possible. Despite these success stories and the resurgence, you can't help but ignore the direction that many of these airlines are headed in, say, the next 5 to 10 years, and that's a life without the A380. The certification of the much anticipated 777X, alongside potential supply chain issues easing for Airbus and Boeing, will hopefully mean for major airlines such as Lufthansa, they'll finally be able to acquire the aircraft they need. In fact, only a couple of weeks ago, we had the Lufthansa CEO saying that they're continuously losing money because of these related Boeing delivery delays. So, obviously, when they can get the planes in that they need, your wide bodies such as the A380 will most likely no longer be required. Streamlining can finally occur, and the financials, which is obviously a big part of a business, can see associated improvements. So what is next for the A380 then? Well, it's as touched on. Not necessarily... Well, it is as touched on. The future of our industry is not necessarily in the form of quad-engined super jumbos, but rather twin-engine planes, which are the much more efficient type. While nothing can replicate what the A380 has done for airlines, especially in terms of capacity, the closest offerings will be that of the A350-1000 or the 777-9. However, because these airframes do lack capacity, they still make it up in efficiency. So primarily, these aircraft for most companies will be the next step. While some have already acquired next-generation wide-bodies and have covered the A380's departure, they still believe they don't have the precise amount of aircraft from the new gen that would make retiring the A380 at this point a wise decision. The mix between the A380's resurgence being long-term and short-term is more than present. I know for the most part of this video I've covered it more as a short-term resurgence, but even during the pandemic there were a handful of airlines that really did stand out, as they made it very clear that the Super Jumbo would have a place in their fleet once demand returned. They never really backed down from this. That was your British Airways, Qantas, and Emirates coming to mind. Of course, the latter was going to be front and center because they have over 100 A380s to their names. These airlines did return the aircraft to service at the first opportunity that presented itself, and unlike many other airlines, haven't necessarily looked to offload the aircraft in the short term. While we have a rough estimate of when Qantas, say, expects to retire its A380s and a replacement, they will still be around for much longer than you'd imagine many other companies, and obviously Emirates is hoping to extend the life of this plane into the 2040s. These are very prominent examples of airlines that back the aircraft initially and are in it for the more long term. So could they be included in the resurgence? Maybe not necessarily, but if you look at it from a whole, definitely. So to answer the question, is the A380 come back for a long term? No, not in the vast majority of cases, and it's rather being considered a short-term solution to a more broader problem. That broader problem that I hint at relates to the general inability to acquire planes that are viewed as the A380 replacement, or at least planes that will be able to cover for the A380. And if you can't get these on time, or as an airline you don't believe you have enough cover, well, they'll retain the A380 for that little bit longer. So if you're a plane spotter, aviation enthusiasts, maybe you travel around the world, be sure to get on one or see one whenever you have the opportunity to do so. Thanks a lot for your support here on the channel. Do be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Do be sure to take care, do also be safe, and I'll see you in a couple of days for your latest aviation analysis. And we'll fly.